if your underlying business usage of the vehicle is what it is, for what is just the keeping of a logbook and receipts and just forming a bit of a habit, why would you not go through that process and just do it if it was meaning an extra $2,000 a year in tax deductions? Like,
Hey, Paul from Small Crown Productions here, and welcome to the Business of Art. On this channel, I dig into all of the things that we need to help us build a business around our creative work. So tips, tools, strategies, interviews, mindset, whatever I can do to help share knowledge from people who know what they're talking about so that we can do business better and make money from our creative work. So if that is something you are interested in, please consider subscribing. This video is one in a series of over 15 videos relating to tax and finance for creative people in Australia. So this is specific to Australia. It is also general advice. Always, always, always seek specific advice about your situation in your region or country where you are. What I did was ask my creative network for a question that they would love to ask a tax and finance specialist, and then I bundled them all up and took them to Matt Tucker, the principal of Creative Crunches here in Brisbane. Creative Crunches is an arts-focused accountancy firm. They know what they're talking about when it comes to Australian tax law, tax and finance for creative people. But again, general advice. Always seek specific advice to your situation. Matt was super generous to donate his time. I cannot thank him enough for taking the time out of his day to actually sit and answer these questions for us all. So with that, let's dive in to today's question. How do I claim my car expenses?
for it to be valid, it's got to be kept for a continuous 12 weeks.
12 weeks.
12 weeks. Cars is a continuous 12 weeks. We would always advise clients, don't get smart with it, go over, so that you have got absolutely no question that it's continuous 12 weeks. Don't just think of it as 3 months. Think of it as of the actual day that you started and finishing exactly 3 months, like 12 continuous weeks later.
Is that the same for the home usage and the cars?
No, just cars.
Okay.
Anything else is generally a month worth of logging. But if that 12 weeks is not actually consistent of your usage pattern over the year as a whole, technically the law says that it's a waste of your time. It's not enough. You have to keep going until you are satisfied that the percentage that logbook has derived is actually consistent for the year as a whole. Now, when I was doing all of that for the band work, that usage was different. I mean, there were consistent bits for rehearsal, but there were just peaks and troughs with gigs. Yeah. Sometimes you'd just be on fire and you'd be gigging every weekend. Other times that would dry up. Yeah. There might be a period of time where some of those gigs were really hefty on the Gold Coast and Byron, and you like Lismore, and you're throwing hundreds and hundreds of kilometres onto it. Now, if you've gone and set your 12 weeks back in the past, when you thought that all you were really going to do was around town, suddenly all of these extra Ks are just, maybe that's, they're not forming anything. So, I don't know. Again, this comes from me just wanting to have an accurate picture, but I always found maintaining a log, and I do that today as well, with a company vehicle where it's through the company, and there's probably more onus on me to be keeping that business usage really nice and tight as I can. Otherwise, I've got FBT problems. I am far more interested in just keeping that log in the vehicle and writing it down every single time. See, this is the thing that I say to every client. Every client that says to me, the logbook is onerous, etc., that always comes from someone who's never kept one. If they actually make the step and do that, I've rarely had a client call me back and say that was a waste of my time.
Vehicle that you've purchased for business use and you're just using it for that.
Yeah,
but to keep logbooks for the cars.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a hard and fast rule by any means, but very common for families, where they are going to have 2 cars, where it's a deliberate separateness. There's the work vehicle and there's the private one, and it's for keeping the logbooks and all that sort of stuff. They really do try to keep all of that separate. I've got a client running a private company where there's 3 cars being run through that company, all with different business percentages. One of them is ostensibly mostly private, but the others are much more business related. So one is very highly, one is probably a mix, and one is kind of more private. The client even goes to the extra level of using particular fuel accounts or cards. So trying to run up all of the fuel on a particular vehicle, and his bookkeeper is aware that every time a particular card is getting used, then the fuel coming through this particular account is related to this particular vehicle. So it makes it easier for her to be, and because for us, we need to get an idea of, well, what's this vehicle? What's its cost structure? What's all the fuel for this? And what's this vehicle? Things like registration and insurance are a lot more easy to just sort of separate, but fuel is fuel. Yeah. So there's those little mechanisms, and in terms of keeping that logbook as well, I mean, again, the logbook is just kept in the vehicle. And this is another thing too, like we're moving into a thing where people want to use apps, and that's fine if they want to use apps, but we've got other clients that still just maintain a written log, and they just keep it physically in that vehicle, just handy at all times, so that it's almost like that reminder, visual reminder all the time, that as soon as they're parked and they're like this, that logbook is just staring them in the face, so that they're always reminded to make the logbook entry. And there'll be separate logs in each of those vehicles. Again, just substantiation. With vehicles, we've probably talked a lot about the logbook method, which is like the full-blown version of it. But there's also, for those that just don't want to do that, there's a cents per kilometre method. It uses an ATO standard deduction rate per kilometre. So because you don't need a logbook, you don't need to keep receipts for anything, it's just an estimate. But that it means that the ATO caps this claim at 5,000 business kilometres a year. But if you're going to use this particular method, then the only thing that you would need to show them in an audit is how did you arrive at the estimate. I mean, you might be up at the maximum of 5,000 and there's no need to go any further than that. You may do that anyway, but you're not going to get any benefit for it. So that might be, look, I use my vehicle every week. Generally speaking, I'm running X number of runs around the city, maybe a 10 to 15 kilometre radius, 2, 3, 4 times a week. I've got one constant gig that I'm doing on the Gold Coast. That's another couple of 100 kilometres. Here was Byron for these 2 shows. So you can just come back onto Google Maps and go, oh, this is where I went today, bang, bang. I mean, if you've recorded an odometer trip yourself, it's nice and accurate, but sometimes you might have just forgotten to do that. But so long as something's triggered quite quickly where you can get back to that little, it might be a spreadsheet or a Word document that you're keeping, just something that gives the ATO something as to how you arrived at the estimate. Yeah. And we've got other clients that will keep a logbook handy, because maybe they're not using their car that often, but when they do, they just want to record it. They find it easier to just have that logbook in the car. They're not hell-bent on maintaining it properly for a continuous 12 weeks or what the logbook method requires, but they just have it there and they just record opening and closing odometer readings, and that's what they can produce as a record at the end of the year. It's like, it's just an estimate. Well, it's a pretty accurate estimate, actually, but here's my document as to how I came to that figure. And then once you've just estimated that number of business kilometres, you just times it by the standard ATO deduction rate, and that's your claim. So if the amount of business use is actually not that high, that it is just random bits and pieces that you're doing, you'll probably find that cents per kilometre claim is well worth it. It could even be worth more to you at the end of the year than having gone through the full logbook method. But you don't really know where your car usage sits until you've actually gone through that process. Even if you just do it once, to find out what that underlying business percentage is and see, like, what is your annual fuel cost? I mean, if you've never actually kept the documentation, you probably have no idea what you're spending each year in fuel. You wouldn't unless you'd monitored it.
There we go. Thanks again to Matt Tucker from Creative Crunches for taking the time to answer these questions. If you have a tax and finance question of your own that you would like to ask, please pop it in the comments below and I will do everything I can to get that answered, or link you to one of the other videos where it may already have been asked and answered. Also in the description below is a link to the playlist that contains all of these tax and finance questions, so you can dig through there and see if your question has already been answered. And of course, it would be fantastic if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel, but most importantly, if you got something of value out of this, there is a good chance you will know somebody else who can as well. Please share it with them, tag them in the comments, whatever you've got to do, pay it forward so that we can keep helping each other out. Thanks very much. I'll see you on the next one.